When my daughter Minerva, or Min, as we call her, was about 2.5 years old, I made a video that I sent to my mom of her. I said in the video, "Hey, say something to your grandma. Say something to your grandma." Min got nose to nose with the camera and said, "I want to be an adult." Ooh, I laughed and laughed, but it made her very difficult to parent because she wasn't an adult. She was a kid and I was an adult. And I thought of this a few years later. She's in first grade and she's having a hard time. She's misbehaving in class, which is not like her. She is a rule follower in many ways, but she was breaking the rules. She was acting out in class. She was like getting under her desk at strange times and for no reason. And it was kind of driving the teacher crazy. And she finally sent her to the principal. Sent her to the, and again, Min was not that kind of kid to go to the principal, but there she was. So I was finally said, "Hey, Min, what's up with that? Why are you going to the principal's office? That's not like you." And she said, "Ugh, principal, can't stand that woman." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Because she walks around the school like she runs the place." I said, "She does." And Min looked at me, genuinely surprised, and said, "Really?" I said, "Yes, that's what principals do. Who did you think ran the school?" And Min quite innocently said, "Me." I said, "You think you run the school?" She said, "Yeah." I said, No, the principal does." I said, "Who do you think runs the classroom?" She said, "Me." I said, "No, that's the teacher." "Oh," I said, "Who do you think runs this house?" And she said, "Me." I said, "No." I said, "No, in all those cases, an adult is in charge." And she said, "Oh." And it got a little bit easier being her parent at that point as she understood the theoretical chain of command, adult to child. But, it did explain her behavior, because if she thought she was in charge, she thought she was running the classroom, and if she really believed that was her job, how frustrating that no one listens to you. No one does what you say. It would be really frustrating. And it was an example of misunderstanding your job. And I think writers do that sometimes too. I was interviewing Tess Gerritsen just recently, the crime novelist. She's sold a lot of books. She's written a lot of books. And she writes, again, crime and suspense. And we were talking about how one finds a story. And she said, yeah, it's not unusual, she said, for her to be 3/4 of the way through the first draft of her book. And she writes about a book every year or so. First, about 3/4 of the way through, and only then learn who the villain is. That's a long time not to know. But she knows, she'll figure it out. One of the biggest differences between, I think, amateur writers and experienced writers is amateur writers try to do something that isn't their job. It's their imagination, their inspiration, their muse's job to figure out most of the story. That's where that comes from. If you try to know what the muse knows what your imagination knows, you're going to feel like you don't know enough, like you're ill-equipped, and it's going to seem like an impossible job. But the truth is, when we write, we show up and we collaborate with whatever you want to call it, your imagination, inspiration, source energy, the muse, whatever it is. And its job brings you the little details you never predicted, brings you the ideas, brings you the inspired next thing that brings the story together. It's not your job. It's not your job. Just like it wasn't Min's job to run the classroom. It's not your job to know everything about your story. It is your job, however, to know that you're interested. It is your job to recognize something that is alive and good and cool that you want to follow, and recognize something that isn't, that is a little dull, that isn't interesting to you. That is your job. But it is your job after that. After you can recognize what is cool, what works for you and what doesn't, what belongs in your story and what doesn't, then you got to let your imagination do its job. And, in Min's defense, as a kid, you are asked to trust adults. You kind of have to trust them. You have to trust when they tell you how the world works, where to go, what to do. You spend a lot of time when you're young just doing what adults tell you to do, and you got to trust them. And the truth is, of course, not all adults are trustworthy. Not all adults deserve your trust. Some of them are malicious, and some just don't really have their act together enough, but they kind of are good to be trusted. And we all recognize this at some point. And as artists, I think to some degree, the relationship between the artist and the imagination is somewhat related to the relationship between the child and the adult. who we trust that adult and then at some point feel that trust is betrayed? And can we trust this muse, this imagination, this entity, this creative intelligence that we're collaborating with? The answer is yes. Unlike adults, who get all confused and mixed up about the world themselves and perhaps believe that they're in charge of things they're not in charge of. Unlike those people that we have mislaid our trust in, you cannot mislay your trust when you trust in your own imagination, when you trust in your own muse. Do that, and they will give you all the answers you need to tell your story. You do your job. Love the book. Love the idea. Follow the idea. Listen to the muse, and trust that together you'll get where you want to go. Thanks for listening. As always, subscribe if you don't want to miss an episode. And if you like it, say so. I do love to hear from you. Yes, I do. So until next week, this is Bill Kenower. Stay fearless.